Everyone believed Renata Ashford had betrayed the Calloway family 5 days before one of the most closely watched crime family weddings the East Coast had seen in a decade. Marcus Calloway's plus-size assistant disappeared without a word, taking a set of encrypted operational files with her. His fiancée, Vivienne Holt, called her a snake. His own lieutenants demanded she be found and made an example of. Even the evidence, laid out cold and clean on a conference table, seemed impossible to argue with. But Marcus couldn't silence the feeling crawling under his ribs that something about it was wrong. Instead of sending armed men to drag her back, he drove out alone. At night, to the crumbling walk-up where Renata lived. When no one answered his knock, he put his shoulder into the door until the frame gave way. Inside, he found the woman his entire organization had already condemned, lying unconscious on the bathroom tile. One hand locked white, knuckled around a blood-smeared thumb drive. With the last of her strength, she opened her eyes, found his face, and whispered 7 words that tore his world in half. Don't marry Vivienne. It's a trap. 7 years. That was how long Renata Ashford had worked at Marcus Calloway's side, without ever taking an unscheduled day off. She arrived before the building's lights were even switched on and left long after the cleaning crews had gone home. She remembered every password, every shipment manifest, every debt owed, and every favor promised. If someone needed to know which warehouse had signed a lease 11 years ago, or which container had crossed the river docks on a storm-soaked Wednesday night, nobody bothered asking Marcus. They asked Renata. To most of the people who passed through the Calloway offices, though, she barely registered as a person. She was the heavyset woman behind the desk outside the boss's door, dressed in oversized cardigans and sensible flats, carrying folders instead of weapons, opinions instead of threats. Visitors forgot her face the moment they'd walked past her. Marcus never underestimated her. He simply assumed, in the careless way people assume the sun will rise, that she would always be there. That assumption cracked apart on a humid Tuesday afternoon. Renata hasn't checked in, Desmond Reyes said, setting a tablet on Marcus's desk. Without preamble, Marcus barely lifted his eyes from the wedding contract spread in front of him. Call her. Already did. No answer. Desmond shook his head slowly. Her numbers disconnected. Marcus frowned. That wasn't like her, not even close. She'd once taken a work call from the passenger seat of an ambulance while her mother was being wheeled into an ER. Missing work without a word simply wasn't in her. When did anyone last see her? 4 nights ago. The room went quiet. 4 nights. Marcus repeated it, like the number itself was a threat. The same night the shipment ledgers went dark in the vault. The exact same night. The timing was too clean to ignore. Within the hour, rumors had already burned through the entire Calloway estate. Someone had cleaned out confidential files. Someone inside had turned, and by the time the sun dropped behind the harbor cranes, the whole organization had already decided who that someone was. Renata Ashford. Tried and convicted before a single investigator had lifted a finger, when Vivienne Holt swept into Marcus's office in a sharply tailored emerald suit. Her face carried more irritation than worry. I warned you about her, she said, arms already folding. Marcus looked up. Warned me about what? Exactly. That she was too quiet, too watchful. Vivienne's mouth curled. People like that spend years studying everyone around them, waiting for the perfect moment to cash it in. Desmond shifted near the window. Saying nothing, she vanished with classified files 5 days before our wedding. Vivienne continued, ticking the sentence off like an accountant closing a ledger. If that isn't betrayal, Marcus. I honestly don't know what is. Marcus didn't answer. Not because he agreed, because something about the whole picture refused to sit flush. Renata had controlled the flow of information through his empire for 7 years. If she'd wanted to burn him, she could have vanished with enough material to level the entire operation 18 months ago. When nobody was watching her that closely. Why now? Why 5 days before the wedding? And why leave behind almost every single thing she owned? Late that afternoon, he stood alone in her office. Everything sat exactly where she'd left it. Her coffee mug, dried out, still rested by the keyboard. Sticky notes crowded the monitor's edge, with reminders for meetings a full week away. Beneath a stack of invoices, a medical bill peeked out. And beside it, in her small, precise handwriting, eggs, broth, refill prescription. Nothing about it looked like a woman planning to disappear forever. He slid open the bottom drawer. Inside were 3 worn notebooks, a spare pair of reading glasses, a dozen handwritten schedules, nothing valuable. Nothing missing. His gaze caught on a small framed photograph tucked in the corner, Renata standing beside an older woman in a wheelchair. Both of them laughing despite the visible exhaustion behind their eyes. Her mother, something in Marcus's chest tightened uncomfortably. In 7 years, he had never once asked Renata about her family. Not once. A knock broke the thought apart. Desmond stepped in. We found her address. Marcus straightened immediately. Where? Desmond hesitated. You're not going to like it. 20 minutes later, Marcus's grey SUV crawled through one of the oldest, most forgotten blocks on the city's east side. The streetlights flickered before the sun had even fully set. The buildings looked like they had survived 4 decades of neglect through nothing but sheer stubbornness. Marcus stared through the windshield. This can't be right. Desmond checked the slip of paper again. Unit 9F. I pay her enough to live wherever she wants. Apparently she didn't want that. The stairwell smelled of damp concrete and rusted pipe. Every footstep on the narrow steps echoed down the corridor. Unit 9F sat at the far end. Its door dented near the handle. Marcus knocked. Nothing. He knocked harder. Still nothing. He tried the knob, locked, and felt every instinct in his body sharpen at once. Renata. He called through the door. Silence. Then a thin, metallic smell slid out from beneath the frame. Blood. He didn't wait a second longer. One hard kick splintered the old lock, and the door swung inward, spilling cold. Stale air into the hallway. He crossed the threshold, scanning every corner. The living room held almost nothing. A folding table. On aging laptop. Neat stacks of labeled folders. No television. No decoration. Nothing but the bare architecture of survival. Then he saw it, a thin, dried trail of blood leading down the hallway toward the bathroom. His hand found the revolver under his jacket as his pulse climbed. He followed the trail. The bathroom door hung half open. Someone lay motionless on the tile inside. He pushed the door the rest of the way with the barrel leading, then froze. Renata Ashford lay crumpled against the tub. Her oversized sweater soaked dark with dried blood. One trembling hand pressed to a deep wound at her side. The other locked around a small black flash drive with a grip so tight her knuckles had gone bloodless white. She looked nothing like the composed woman who had run his empire from behind a desk for 7 years. She looked starved, exhausted, entirely alone. Renata. No response. He pressed 2 fingers to her throat and found a pulse faint. But there, and let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Renata. It's Marcus. Herr Eilis Fludder. It took her a long moment to focus, to recognize his face. And when she did, something like relief briefly cut through the fear in her eyes. You came yourself, she whispered. I should have come sooner. She tried to smile. Pain erased it before it fully formed. They're watching. Marcus swept the apartment with his eyes again. No movement. No broken glass. No sign anyone remained. Only silence. He gently slid the drive from her fingers. I've got it. No. Her fingers weakly reached for his sleeve. Hide it. I will. She relaxed only after hearing the words. That was when he noticed the fresh bruising circling her wrists. The split knuckles. The torn sleeve stiff with dried blood. This hadn't been a robbery. Someone had questioned her. Someone had expected her to hand over whatever lived on that drive. She hadn't. Renata. Who did this to you? Her breath came uneven. I couldn't trust anyone. Tell me. Her lips shook. They're inside. He leaned closer. Inside where? The wedding? A violent cough interrupted her, and blood touched the corner of her mouth. Marcus grabbed a towel from the sink rack and pressed it against the wound in her side. We're leaving. Now. They'll follow. They won't. You don't understand. Then make me understand. She closed her eyes, forced them open again through sheer will. Don't marry Vivienne. Her voice barely carried. It's a trap. His face went hard. What do you mean? The alliance, another shallow breath, was never real. He went perfectly still. Rain had started tapping against the small bathroom window. The Holt family, she whispered, doesn't want your empire. They want she fought to stay conscious. What's left after you're dead? The words dropped over the tiny bathroom like a slab of ice. Marcus had spent 9 months building the marriage alliance. Every lawyer had signed off on it. Every advisor had toasted to it. Every financial projection promised expansion beyond anything the Calloway shipping network had ever touched. And yet Renata looked genuinely, deeply afraid. Not confused. Certain. She wasn't guessing, she knew. How? I found transfers. She nodded weakly toward the other room. Laptop. Hidden accounts. Payments to someone inside your own family. His jaw locked. Who? I couldn't finish. They found me first. Her whole body shuddered with fever. I copied everything. The drive is proof. Her head lolled to the side. Renata. She no longer answered. Marcus lifted her carefully into his arms. She weighed far less than he'd expected. And the realization hit him with a wave of quiet, ugly guilt. People had called her the plus-size assistant for years, as though her size were the whole of her, when underneath the oversized sweaters was a body worn thin by exhaustion, skipped meals, and years spent putting everyone else's needs above her own. She had hidden her suffering as carefully as she'd hidden his secrets, carrying her out through the tiny kitchen. His eyes caught on the single cabinet, 2 cans of broth, a heel of stale bread, expired cold medicine. Nothing else. This was how the woman safeguarding his entire operation had been living, while he'd approved bonus after bonus, gift after gift for Vivienne's wedding planning, never once wondering why Renata always declined the company dinners. Outside, Desmond went pale at the sight of her in Marcus's arms. May God. Call Dr. Nakamura, Marcus ordered. Not through headquarters. A private physician, why not, if there's a traitor inside my own organization? Marcus said coldly, I don't trust anyone connected to it. Desmond nodded and moved. Marcus laid Renata across the back seat of the SUV, as gently as if she were made of glass. Just before she slipped under again, her fingers caught his sleeve. "There are copies." "Where?" "My mother's care home. Locker 52. Her eyes fluttered. "Marcus." "Yes?" "If anything happens to me." "It won't," he said, quiet and certain, for the first time since he'd known her. She let herself believe him. Her hand slid from his arm and the car pulled away. Neither man noticed the dark van parked across the street, or the man inside lifting a phone to his ear. "They found her," a calm voice answered, then moved to phase 2. By the following morning, only 4 people in the world knew Renata Ashford was alive: Marcus, Desmond, Dr. Priya Nakamura, and Renata herself. Everyone else, including Vivienne Holt, still believed the missing assistant was somewhere out there. Running, Marcus intended to keep it that way. Dr. Nakamura finished redressing the wound before stepping into the hall. The blade missed her liver by less than an inch. Another hour in that apartment, and I wouldn't have been able to help her. Marcus glanced through the cracked bedroom door. Renata was asleep. Her breathing finally steady. Can she talk? In short stretches. Can she work? Priya gave him a sharp look. Absolutely not. She'll try anyway. Then stop her. For the first time in years, someone had given Marcus an order instead of asking permission. Surprisingly, he obeyed it for about 18 hours. By late afternoon, Renata insisted on sitting up at a small desk against every protest. She looked pale, moved slowly, but her eyes were as sharp as ever. Marcus set the flash drive beside her laptop. "Can you open it? I built the encryption myself." "Can anyone else?" A faint, tired smile. "Not unless they enjoy bricking their hardware." Lines of code filled the screen. Folders opened one after another: shipping manifests, wire transfers, private messages. Then a folder titled Ceremony Budget appeared, and something changed in Marcus's expression. "That's not a budget," Renata said quietly. "It never was." She clicked it open. Instead of catering invoices, a cascade of hidden transactions unfolded, money flowing from shell companies tied to the Holt family into offshore accounts for nearly 11 months. Every single payment closed with the same authorization tag: Lanternio. Marcus stared at the screen. "I've never used that phrase." "I didn't think you had." Renata pulled up another document. "It belongs to someone inside your own organization." Desmond leaned in over her shoulder. "Can we trace where it originated? If we find the terminal it was authorized from?" She opened a new file, and a digital map bloomed across the screen, dozens of small dots marking secure terminals throughout the Calloway network. One blinked red. Marcus recognized it instantly. "My uncle's office." The room went silent. Julian Calloway, his father's younger brother. The man who had raised him after his parents were killed. The man entrusted with every major financial decision the family had made for 2 decades. Desmond sank slowly into a chair. "That's not possible." Marcus said nothing. Impossible had become an increasingly cheap word over the last day and a half. Renata kept digging. "There's more." She pulled a set of deleted emails recovered from an old backup server. One message had never reached its intended recipient. Subject line: "Final transfer, before the ceremony." Marcus read it in complete silence. The wedding had never been designed to merge 2 empires. It had been engineered to erase one, according to the plan. Once the ceremony concluded, Marcus would board a private reception aboard one of the Calloway cargo vessels. The guest list had already been quietly rewritten. The security detail had already been swapped. Within 2 hours of departure, the ship would vanish at sea. Officially, a tragic accident. Unofficially, the Calloway Empire would lose its head. Julian would assume temporary control. Corbin Holt, Vivienne's father, would absorb the shipping network through emergency clauses buried deep inside the marriage contract. Every piece of it had been arranged months in advance. Desmond looked at Marcus. Ashton, they've already carved up your empire. Marcus's voice stayed unnervingly level. No. They think they have. He wanted the conspirators comfortable, confident, careless. Confident people made mistakes. That evening, Desmond quietly drove out to the assisted living facility where Renata's mother lived. Locker 52 held exactly what Renata had promised: a second flash drive, printed statements, photographs, copies of signed contracts, even handwritten notes linking Julian directly to Corbin Holt. When Desmond returned after dark, he spread it all across Marcus's study table. There's no denying any of this. Marcus examined each page carefully. Years earlier, Julian had taught him a rule he clearly hadn't applied to himself. Never accuse a man until he has nowhere left to run. Just before midnight, Marcus carried 2 cups of tea into Renata's room. She was awake. You should be sleeping, she said. So should you. He handed her a cup. She took it carefully, and for a while, neither of them spoke. Finally, Marcus broke the silence. I owe you an apology. She looked surprised. For what? For believing, even for a second, that you'd betrayed me. I should have known better. You had proof. I only had assumptions. She lowered her eyes. I've always been easy to blame. He frowned. What do you mean by that? A quiet, humorless laugh. I'm the invisible woman. Marcus, the assistant, the heavyset employee nobody notices unless something's already gone wrong. When important people walk into a room, they remember your suit. They remember Vivienne's smile. Nobody remembers the woman carrying the folders. She looked toward the window. I learned a long time ago that invisible people hear everything. Marcus studied her in silence. How many conversations had she absorbed while everyone else dismissed her presence entirely? How many disasters had she quietly stopped without ever expecting a word of thanks? 7 years. He understood now that she hadn't simply organized his empire, she had protected it. Alone. In the dark. While he never once noticed the weight she was carrying, a knock cut the moment short. Desmond entered without a word and set a sealed envelope on the table. What is it? Arrived by courier. No sender. Inside was a single photograph: Marcus, standing outside Renata's apartment building, taken the previous day. Beneath it, 5 typed words. We know she's alive. The wedding day arrived under a sky thick with storm clouds. To every guest, walking through the towering doors of the Wardstone Chapel, everything appeared exactly as planned. Luxury cars lined both sides of the block. Private security stood at every entrance. Judges, politicians, and men who ran entire criminal territories filled the pews in perfectly tailored black. The marriage of Marcus Calloway and Vivienne Holt had grown into far more than a wedding. It was a public declaration that 2 powerful empires were becoming one. Only Marcus knew it was about to become something else entirely. He stood alone in a small room behind the sanctuary, fastening the last button of his charcoal suit. Desmond entered quietly. Our people are in position. Marcus nodded. Julian thinks everything's proceeding on schedule. Vivienne, smiling. Marcus looked at his own reflection one last time. Good. People smile widest, right before they lose. Across the hall, Vivienne admired herself in a full-length mirror. Her burgundy gown shimmered under the lights. A heavy diamond choker resting against her collarbone. Corbin Holt adjusted his cufflinks beside her. Everything's ready, he said. The contracts, waiting for his signature after the ceremony. The ship, crew's been swapped. Security. Oh. He smiled. Satisfied. By tonight, the Calloway Empire belongs to us. Neither of them noticed the small recording device hidden inside the bridal bouquet resting on the dressing table. Every word transmitted straight to Desmond's earpiece. The chapel bells rang. Guests rose. Music swelled through the sanctuary. Marcus walked toward the altar with the composure of a man stepping calmly into his own future. Only Desmond noticed the faint wireless earpiece tucked beneath Marcus's collar. Recording confirmed. He murmured, "Everything's live." Marcus gave the barest nod. Moments later, Vivienne appeared at the end of the aisle, radiant under a wall of camera flashes, the picture of the perfect bride to every guest watching. To Marcus, she looked like the final piece of a carefully built lie. She reached the altar. The minister began. Vows, prayers, smiles. Then came the question. Marcus Calloway, do you take Vivienne Holt to be your lawful wife? Silence stretched. The minister waited. Guests exchanged uneasy glances. Marcus slowly turned from Vivienne to face the hundreds of people filling the pews behind him. No. The word rolled through the chapel like thunder. Confusion rippled outward instantly. Vivienne's face drained. What? I said no. This isn't funny. I agree. He reached into his jacket. Gasps swept the room. Half the guests assumed he was drawing a weapon. Instead, he pulled out a flash drive. Desmond connected it in seconds to the massive screens originally rigged for wedding photographs. The screens lit up. Wire transfers. Encrypted emails. Shipping contracts. Hidden accounts. Document after document rolled across the chapel walls. And whispers exploded through the crowd. Then came the recorded conversation from Vivienne's dressing room. Her own voice ringing out through the sanctuary. By tonight, the Calloway Empire belongs to us. Corbin Holt's face went white as chalk. Vivienne lunged toward Desmond. Turn it off. He stepped calmly out of reach. There are 11 backup copies. Marcus turned his gaze to Julian. Care to explain the offshore transfers? Uncle, Julian forced a laugh. This proves nothing, doesn't it? Marcus nodded toward the next screen, where a digital signature bloomed beside every payment. Lantanio. Julian's smile disappeared entirely. The room slowly turned to look at him. For 7 years. Marcus said, taking one measured step forward. I believed loyalty was something you inherited. He let the pause sit. I was wrong. It's earned. Julian bolted for a side exit and made it exactly nowhere. Security surrounded him from every direction within seconds. Not the men he'd quietly bribed. Marcus's oldest, most loyal soldiers. Men whose loyalty had never once been for sale. Corbin tried to follow and ran straight into federal financial investigators, pouring in through the main doors. Desmond had anonymously delivered every scrap of evidence to them before dawn. The lead agent unfolded a warrant. Corbin Holt, you're under arrest for conspiracy, financial fraud, attempted murder, racketeering, and bribery. Chaos broke through the sanctuary. Guests scrambled backward. Cameras captured every second. News crews outside pushed through the entrance as word of the scandal tore across the city in real time. Vivienne turned desperately to Marcus. "You believe your assistant over me?" His voice never rose. "No. I believe evidence. Pause. And I believe the woman who nearly died protecting me." Something like doubt finally crossed her face. "Renata's dead." Marcus's expression didn't shift. "Is she?" The chapel doors opened slowly. Every conversation in the room died at once. Renata Ashford walked in. She moved carefully, one hand resting on a cane, her injuries still faintly visible beneath a moss-green dress. No jewelry, no performance, nothing meant to impress anyone. And still, every eye in the building followed her. The woman everyone had branded a traitor was alive. Vivienne stumbled backward. That's impossible." Renata walked until she stood beside Marcus and set a thick folder on the minister's podium. "Original financial records," she said, calm and unhurried. "Signed agreements, payment confirmations, surveillance photographs." She looked directly at Julian. "You forgot one thing." He swallowed hard. "What?" "You assumed invisible people don't notice who walks past their desk." A courtroom stillness settled over the entire chapel. Marcus looked out over the shocked crowd one final time. This wedding was supposed to unite two families. He reached for the marriage license, resting on the altar, and tore it cleanly down the middle. The sound of ripping paper cutting through the silence. "It ends here." Behind him, officers cuffed Julian. Federal agents walked Corbin and Vivienne out toward waiting cars. Camera flashes, exploding like lightning through the chapel doors. Within the hour, every news outlet in the country would be running the same headline. The Calloway wedding collapsed before the vows, and the real story was the assistant who exposed an empire of betrayal. Marcus turned to Renata. For the first time in 7 years, he wasn't looking at the woman behind the desk. He was looking at the woman who had saved his life for several long seconds after the arrests. Nobody moved. The grand chapel prepared for the wedding of the decade now stood silent under the weight of an entirely different story. Reporters crowded the entrance. Camera flashes lit up the shattered ceremony. Guests whispered in disbelief. But Marcus noticed none of it. His attention stayed fixed on Renata. She stood quietly near the altar, leaning lightly on her cane, the bruising beneath her eyes not yet fully healed, every step still carrying the stiffness of someone recovering from wounds that should have killed her. She looked exhausted. She was also, unmistakably, still standing. That alone felt like something close to a miracle. Outside, reporters shouted questions from every direction. "Mr. Calloway, did your assistant really uncover the entire conspiracy? Were you nearly assassinated? Is the alliance officially dead?" Marcus ignored every microphone shoved in his direction and walked instead toward Renata. The crowd parted instinctively. For 7 years, photographers had captured Marcus in 1,000 different frames. Not one of them had ever once photographed the woman who walked beside him. Today, every lens found her. Renata lowered her eyes, clearly uncomfortable with the sudden attention. "I should go," she said quietly. Marcus stopped walking. "No." She looked up at him. "This is your moment." He shook his head slowly. It never was. He turned to face the wall of reporters. "You've spent the last 5 days asking the wrong question." The crowd fell silent. "You've been asking whether my assistant betrayed me." He glanced at Renata. "You should have been asking who protected me." Every camera swung toward her at once. Renata Ashford spent 7 years quietly stopping mistakes. most people never even knew existed. Marcus continued, his voice steady. She uncovered financial fraud. She exposed an attempted takeover of my entire organization. She nearly died protecting the evidence that saved every person standing in this building today. He let the words settle. Everyone assumed the worst about her. Starting today, everyone is going to know her name. The applause started with a single elderly judge seated near the back of the chapel. Then another guest joined. Then another. Within moments, hundreds of people were applauding a woman who had spent years being invisible on purpose. Renata blinked rapidly, caught completely off guard. She had spent years learning how to avoid attention. Now, for the first time in her life, she couldn't escape it. Later that afternoon, the Calloway Executive Board gathered inside headquarters. The atmosphere in the room felt entirely different than it had a week earlier. Julian's office had already been sealed off. New security protocols were already in place. Marcus walked into the conference room, carrying a single folder. Every executive rose to their feet. He stayed standing instead of taking his usual chair. For years. He began. This organization believed authority was tied to a title. He set the folder down on the table. We were wrong. He glanced toward the open doorway. Renata. She hesitated before stepping inside. The room went completely still. Marcus walked to the empty chair beside his own and pulled it back. This seat has stayed empty far too long. I'd like you to sit here. She stared at the chair. I don't belong at this table. Several executives lowered their eyes. Marcus answered without hesitation. No one in this room has earned that seat more than you have. Slowly, almost reluctantly, Renata sat down. Marcus turned to address the board. Effective immediately. Renata Ashford is my chief strategic partner. Every major operational decision now requires her sign-off. No one objected, not out of fear of Marcus, but because every person in that room finally understood exactly how much the organization owed her. That evening, Marcus drove out to visit Delphine Ashford. Renata's mother. She looked healthier than he'd expected. Though age and illness had clearly left their mark, she smiled warmly the moment he walked in. So, she said, you finally met my stubborn daughter. He couldn't help smiling back. I did. Delphine laughed softly. She gets that from her father. Marcus sat beside her. I wanted you to hear this from me directly. He handed over a small stack of documents. Delphine adjusted her glasses, her hands trembling slightly as she read, What is all this? The mortgage on your house has been paid off. Every medical bill is cleared. Your treatment program is fully funded going forward. She looked up, stunned. For how long? For as long as you need it. Marcus said quietly. Tears gathered in her eyes. You don't owe us anything. He looked toward the window. I owe your daughter far more than this. Weeks passed, and life gradually found a new rhythm. The papers eventually moved on to other headlines. The trials began, and Corbin Holt, Vivienne Holt, and Julian Calloway each faced a mountain of evidence too heavy to argue against. Meanwhile, the Calloway shipping network recovered faster than any analyst had predicted, not through luck, but because the woman who had quietly kept the entire operation running was no longer forced to work from the shadows. One evening, after another long day, Renata stepped out onto the terrace outside Marcus's office. The harbor shimmered under the setting sun. Cargo ships gliding peacefully across the water. Marcus joined her a moment later, 2 cups of coffee in hand. He passed one to her, and she accepted it with a small, grateful smile. "I still think this office is too big." She said, "You say that every single day." "It echoes." "I know." She laughed, a real laugh. The first completely unguarded sound he'd ever heard from her. After a moment, she glanced over at him. "Can I ask you something? Anything? Why didn't you replace me while I was gone?" He answered without hesitation. "Because no one else could." She smiled faintly. "I mean, after everyone believed I'd betrayed you." Marcus looked out over the water before he spoke. "At first, I almost did believe it. I hate that I did." He paused, but something kept bothering me. "What?" "You never once broke a promise. Not in 7 years. I realized I trusted your character more than I trusted the evidence in front of me." Renata lowered her eyes. "Thank you." He shook his head gently. "No, thank you." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. And it wasn't uncertain. It was peaceful. Finally, Marcus spoke again. 7 years ago, I hired an assistant." He turned to face her fully. "Today, I'm asking my partner to stay by my side." His voice softened. "Not because you owe me anything. Not because you saved my life. Because I can't picture building whatever comes next without you standing here." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Renata smiled, a real one. The kind she had spent years hiding behind endless schedules, stacks of paperwork, and quiet self-sacrifice. "I'd like that," she said. Behind them, the city carried on the way it always had. Ships came and went. Businesses opened their doors and closed them again. Empire rose. And empires fell. But one thing had changed for good. The woman everyone had overlooked had become the one person nobody could replace. And the man who had nearly lost everything finally understood that real loyalty is rarely the loudest voice in the room. More often, it's the quiet person standing beside you every single day, asking for nothing while quietly giving you everything.